There is a particular sadness that arrives when we begin to outgrow our own lives. It rarely announces itself. It enters quietly. One day the conversations that once animated us fall strangely flat. The dreams that once pulled us forward lose some of their gravity. Places we loved begin to feel smaller than they once did. Nothing outside has changed. The same streets remain, the same people remain, the same mornings continue to arrive, and yet something inside us has already started moving. Part of us wants to keep walking. Part of us wants to stay exactly where we are. And somewhere between those two movements, a loneliness appears that has no obvious name. The loneliness of becoming someone new. Growth rarely feels like growth while it is happening. More often, it feels like confusion. The old motivations weaken. The old maps become difficult to trust. Certainty slowly loses its authority. For a while, we find ourselves standing in a strange territory between identities. The person we have been no longer fits comfortably. The person we are becoming has not yet arrived. Psychology calls this transition. Ancient stories simply called it a journey. Either way, it is the place where many people decide to turn back. Because uncertainty has weight, and familiar suffering often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. This raises an uncomfortable question. Why do beginnings so often feel like endings? Why does learning ask so much from us? Why does wisdom arrive carrying the emotional texture of loss? And beneath all of these questions, another one quietly waits. What must die for understanding to begin? Because every meaningful education carries a hidden cost. Not measured in effort, not measured in intelligence, but in our willingness to loosen our grip on the person who brought us this far. Flower Fruit Mountain was still beautiful. Morning mist still drifted between the cliffs. The waterfalls still sang against the rocks. Peach trees still bent beneath their fruit. The monkeys still laughed beneath the open sky. Sun Wukong was still their king. He still sat upon the stone throne. He still raced through forests and leapt across rivers. From the outside, nothing had changed. The mountain remained exactly as it had always been. But there are moments in life after which the world can no longer be seen with the same eyes. Once the monkey had seen old age. He could no longer believe in endless youth. Once he had seen death. He could no longer believe that joy alone was enough. The mountain had not changed. The eyes looking at it had. Life continued. Morning followed morning. The seasons continued their quiet turning. Laughter still echoed through the valley. The celebrations continued beneath the trees. But something inside the monkey refused to return to sleep. The games that once filled entire days no longer held him for long. The songs ended more quickly than before. The silence afterward lasted a little longer. Questions had entered a world that once needed none. What survives when beauty fades? What remains when strength disappears? What becomes of kings when time finally reaches them? The others still belonged completely to the mountain. The monkey was already standing with one foot somewhere else. Fear had opened the door, but fear was not what carried him through it. Another force had appeared, a quiet dissatisfaction. Not with the mountain, not with his companions, not with life itself. A dissatisfaction born from seeing that existence was larger than the world he knew. The mountain was no longer large enough to hold his questions. And questions have a strange power. Once they become large enough, they begin pulling us toward roads we never intended to walk. The desire to understand, the desire to know, the desire to discover whether something exists beyond the horizon. These desires have carried human beings across deserts, oceans, and centuries. They would soon carry a monkey across the sea. There must be something more than this. Not because life has failed us, not because beauty has disappeared, not because what we have is unworthy of love, but because there are moments when the soul becomes larger than the room it once called home. Sun Wukong did not leave Flower Fruit Mountain because the mountain stopped being beautiful. He left because the monkey who belonged there had already begun to disappear, and once that happens, the journey has already begun. Leaving is rarely the hardest part. The hardest part begins after the leaving, the moment when the shoreline starts disappearing behind us, the moment when turning back becomes possible. But moving forward has not yet become easier. One morning, the monkey stepped onto a small wooden raft. Behind him, Flower Fruit Mountain slowly dissolved into mist. Ahead of him, only water. The sea rose and fell beneath the fragile wood. Waves struck the sides of the raft. Wind pushed against his face. Day followed day. The horizon remained unchanged. For the first time in his life, there was nothing around him that could tell him who he was. On the mountain, he had been a king. His name carried weight. His voice carried authority. Thousands moved when he moved. But the ocean has very little interest in titles. Water does not bow. Waves do not care who sits on a throne. The Monkey King, who had ruled a kingdom of stone and waterfalls, became a solitary figure surrounded by endless blue. The sea stripped away every role he had ever carried. King, leader, protector. None of these identities could row the raft for him. For the first time in his life, he stood outside every definition he had ever known. Psychology has many names for this place. Identity transition, liminal space, the beginner's void. Ancient stories understood it long before psychology did. It is the threshold between the no longer and the not yet. The old answers have expired. The new answers have not yet been written. Many journeys end here. The emptiness feels too large. The uncertainty feels too heavy. The silence feels unbearable. And so people return to the shore, back to familiar identities, back to familiar suffering, back to lives that no longer fit. This is the beginner's void. And this is where we discover what survives when everything we used to be is gone. Almost everyone knows the taste of this ocean, the quiet panic of waking up after leaving a 20-year career and no longer knowing how to introduce yourself, the silence of the first night in a new city, the vulnerability of sitting in a therapist's office for the first time, the strange emptiness that follows the end of a role that once defined an entire life. The mind immediately asks, who am I now? What remains if the old identity no longer holds? There is no shortcut through this ocean, no way around it. The only path is through. To keep rowing long enough for a new shoreline to appear, and the horizon changes only for those who refuse to turn back. Eventually, the sea released him. Mountains appeared once more on the horizon. Forests returned. Stone returned. Land returned. But the monkey who stepped onto that shore was not the same one who had left Flower Fruit Mountain. The ocean had taken something from him. Certainty. Titles. The illusion that identity could survive every landscape unchanged, and so he arrived at a cave hidden far from kingdoms, armies, and ambition. The home of Patriarch Subodhi. There were no gates, no soldiers, no banners announcing greatness. Only wind moving through trees. Only light resting quietly on stone. Only silence. For the first time since leaving home, the world stopped asking him to become something. In the ancient text, the name of the cave itself hides a riddle. The Cave of the Slanting Moon and 3 Stars. In written Chinese, the character for heart, Xin. Xin is formed from a curved stroke that resembles a slanting moon, and 3 small marks resting above it like stars. The destination had been hidden in the name all along. The monkey believed he had crossed an ocean to find wisdom somewhere outside himself. The story reveals something far stranger. The journey had never been toward a place. It had always been toward a mind. Toward the landscape beneath thought, toward the quiet territory hidden underneath fear, ambition, and noise. The cave was not merely a location, it was an interior world. Human beings have always searched for wisdom in distant places. Mountains, deserts, monasteries, sacred forests. But distance itself was never the medicine. Silence was. Because there are things that cannot be heard while we are speaking. There are truths that refuse to compete with noise. They do not shout. They do not demand attention. They wait, patiently, until the mind becomes quiet enough to hear them. This is why wisdom so often lives at the edge of the world. Not because truth is hiding from us, but because noise usually reaches us first. The mind of every age has its own noise. Some generations heard it in markets, others heard it in kingdoms. We hear it in 1,000 voices asking for attention at once. But truth has never learned how to shout. The deeper questions of life still ask for the same ancient conditions they always have. Space, stillness, patience, and the courage to remain alone long enough to hear what survives when the crowd becomes quiet. There is a profound difference between isolation and solitude. Isolation closes the door because it fears the world. Solitude opens the door inward because it is finally ready to listen. This was the gift waiting for the monkey inside the cave. Not magic, not immortality, not power. The gift was attention. And attention is where wisdom begins. The monkey had finally arrived. The mountain had been left behind. The ocean had been crossed. The teacher had been found. And then, nothing happened. No secret teachings, no ancient techniques, no demonstrations of impossible power, no promises of immortality. Morning arrived. The monkey swept the courtyard. Afternoon arrived. He carried water from the well. Evening arrived. He gathered wood for the fire. The next morning, the same tasks returned. Days became weeks. Weeks became seasons. The student who crossed an ocean searching for revelation found himself holding a broom. And sometimes, the broom is the lesson. 7 years passed this way. 7 years. The Monkey King, who once ruled from a throne of stone, became a nameless figure, gathering fallen leaves from the courtyard. The king who once commanded thousands waited quietly for instructions. The ruler of Flower Fruit Mountain carried buckets of water before sunrise, swept dust from stone steps, watched seasons arrive and disappear through the same window. 7 years of ordinary work, 7 years without recognition, 7 years without advancement, 7 years of the ego slowly learning how to become small enough to listen. At first, the monkey waited for his education to begin. Slowly, he realized this was the education. Most of us approach learning as an act of accumulation. More information, more skill, more achievement, more certainty. We imagine wisdom as something we add to ourselves. The great teachers often move in the opposite direction. They remove the certainty that pretends to be understanding, the identity built entirely upon being right, the need to appear intelligent, the fear of not knowing. A page already crowded with our own words cannot easily receive a new story. The first task was never learning. The first task was becoming empty enough to learn. Empty of certainty, empty of arrogance, empty of the need to already be someone important. This raises a difficult question. What is harder, learning something new or releasing something old? Knowledge asks for effort. Wisdom asks for surrender. Knowledge often adds. Wisdom often removes. Many people spend their lives searching for teachers who will give them more. Very few are prepared for the teacher who begins by taking things away. Importance, certainty, status, the need to be exceptional, the need to already know. The monkey crossed an ocean hoping to become greater. His teacher began by making him smaller, small enough to listen, small enough to wonder, small enough to learn, and in many lives, that is the moment education truly begins. Every real education contains a small funeral, not the death of the body, not the disappearance of who we truly are, something quieter than that, the ending of a way of seeing, the loosening of an identity, the release of an old certainty that once helped us survive. The person who has never loved must disappear so that someone capable of loving can arrive. The self that only knows how to control begins to soften so that trust can enter the room. The version of us that survives through recognition begins to loosen so that freedom has somewhere to grow. Growth rarely asks us to become someone else. More often, it asks us to stop defending someone we no longer need to be. This is why transformation so often feels like grief. Because grief is not reserved for people. We grieve futures that never happened, versions of ourselves that never arrived, and the identities that once protected us, the parts of us that wore survival like armor, the parts that believed they had to rescue everyone, the parts that learned to stay strong at all costs, the parts that became afraid of ever being seen as unfinished, uncertain, or vulnerable. These identities served us. Some of them may even have saved our lives, but eventually, survival and growth stop asking for the same things, and what once protected us can slowly become what confines us. The monkey did not cross the ocean simply to learn magic. He crossed it to become someone capable of receiving it. The lesson was never only about power. It was about space. Space where humility could grow. Space where curiosity no longer needed to compete with pride. Space where wonder could survive without immediately turning itself into certainty. The world often teaches us to become more impressive. The cave was teaching something different. become quieter, become simpler, become teachable. There are very few transformations more difficult than that. This may be the hardest lesson of all. We often imagine growth as expansion, as becoming larger, stronger, more complete. The older traditions describe a different movement, not expansion, but release. A seed does not become a tree by protecting its shell. The shell must split open in darkness. The only identity the seed has ever known must come to an end before roots can move downward and branches can reach for light. The monkey was not learning how to become a more impressive version of himself. He was learning how to let an older version die without rushing to rescue it. That may be the deepest education a human being ever receives. The willingness to stand beside the funeral of your former self and not interrupt it, because sometimes what feels like an ending is simply life making room for something larger to be born. Perhaps this is why the first teacher in every human life is not a person, not a school, not a book, not even a spiritual master. The first teacher is loss, the loss of innocence, the loss of certainty, the loss of old answers, the loss of identities we once believed would stay with us forever. Because every meaningful education begins with an ending. Something closes, something loosens, something quietly falls away, and only then does space appear for something new to enter. The day the monkey entered the cave of the slanting moon and 3 stars, a disciple was born, but something else happened there too. A king quietly began to disappear. Not in a single moment, not through violence, not through failure, but through waiting, through sweeping, through carrying water, through ordinary days that slowly loosened his grip on the image he carried of himself. And perhaps this is why true learning feels so costly, because the price of wisdom is never paid in what we can give, but in what we are willing to lose. Every doorway into wisdom seems to ask for the same thing. Not perfection, not brilliance, not talent, only willingness. The willingness to release old answers, the willingness to stand inside uncertainty, the willingness to become a beginner again. Some versions of ourselves are meant to stay with us for a lifetime. Others carry us only to the next threshold. The child cannot walk through the door meant for the adult. The seeker cannot remain the person they were before the journey began. And the monkey could not become a student while continuing to remain only a king. The person who enters the path is never the same person who walks out of it. And perhaps that is the hidden kindness inside every ending. Life keeps asking us to let go, not because it wants less of us, but because it knows we are larger than any single version of ourselves. The mountain remained, the ocean remained, the cave remained. But the monkey who walked through them had already begun to change. And maybe wisdom begins the moment we stop asking how to become someone new and become willing to say thank you to the person we have been for carrying us this far before gently letting them rest. And tonight, you may recognize yourself somewhere on this road, standing at the edge of a mountain that no longer feels like home, drifting across the open water between who you were and who you are becoming, holding a broom in a quiet courtyard, wondering why life suddenly feels slower than before, or standing beside the ending of a version of yourself you never imagined you would have to leave behind. wherever you are. Remember this: confusion is not failure, uncertainty is not weakness, and endings are not always losses. Sometimes they are simply the form that growth takes before we know what it is becoming. Thank you for walking this part of the journey with us. And if life is asking something old in you to loosen, thank the one who carried you this far, because no version of you was a mistake. Some were homes, some were bridges, some were teachers, and some were only meant to bring you to the next horizon. This is Free You, a place to breathe, a place to return, a place to sit quietly beside the versions of ourselves we are outgrowing, with gratitude, with gentleness, and without fear. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep walking.
Flower, fruit, and mountains still remained. The rivers knew my name. The trees still bent beneath the wind. The mornings came the same. Nothing broke, nothing fell apart, and yet somewhere beneath my chest the world had grown too small. So I stepped onto a wooden raft and watched the shoreline fade. A king became a silhouette inside an endless blue. The sea asked questions the mountain never did, and somewhere between the waves the names I carried loosened. I was no longer who I had been, and not yet who I would become. Only water, only distance, only the sound of becoming unknown. And maybe every journey starts this way, with something beautiful we cannot stay. Maybe wisdom asks for more than courage to begin. Maybe it asks us to leave our old skin, to thank the hands that carried us this far. And let them rest beneath the quiet stars. I crossed an ocean looking for secrets in the sky. But found a broom beside a door and silence in my hands. Morning came, I swept the leaves away. Afternoon, I carried water from the well. 7 years of ordinary days until I learned the broom was not delaying the lesson. The broom was the lesson. And maybe every journey starts this way, with something beautiful we cannot stay. Maybe wisdom asks for more than courage to begin. Maybe it asks us to leave our old skin, to thank the hands that carried us this far, and let them rest beneath the quiet stars. What dies when learning starts? A certainty, a crown, a name, a story we believed would last forever. The seed does not betray its shell by opening. The shell completes its purpose by breaking. Final to so. So if tonight you stand between two worlds, if the shore behind you fades before the new one appears, you are not lost, you are crossing, you are not broken, you are becoming. And somewhere beyond the water, a quiet cave waits, not to make you greater, only gentler, only smaller, only empty enough to finally receive. The mountain remained, the ocean remained, the cave remained, but the one who walked between them had already changed. And maybe wisdom begins the moment we whisper thank you to the person we have been, before gently letting them